And we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to the Mecca of Banter podcast. This is a special Mecca Moments episode, part three, actually, where we cover topics that we don't necessarily have time to cover in a single episode in case, we want to dive into topics a little bit more. And this is one of those times. So today we're going to be diving deep into the Arsenal. And I am joined today. I want to welcome and introduce, the second Quincy University legend that we've had on the podcast, the man in net who has saved Connor Sindobry's ass time and time again,
Well
fellow
said.
Arsenal supporter and a good friend of mine, Nate Griffin. What's up, brother?
Hey, thanks so much for having me, man. And I can't tell you quite how accurate all those things you just said were. So I hope he's listening. And
Oh,
I
he
just
will.
want to say the one thing I want to start off with was it's a beautiful day to be an Arsenal fan,
Oh,
man.
it's the most beautiful of days, my man, especially with Everton coming up tomorrow. I'm stoked for a little revenge game at the Emirates.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, without further ado, let's get into it. I know that we had a great start to the season, and so I feel like that's kind of where we should start prior to the World Cup. Um, 12-1-1, perfect
Crazy.
home record before the World Cup. I believe we were, several points above City at that point. But I'd love to get your thoughts on, before we dive into the second half, how you were feeling. I know that as an Arsenal fan, the last several years have been tough. I know it has been for me, and this is like the first Arsenal team in quite a long time that I've been excited to watch week in and week out. So love to hear your thoughts on the first half.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you started with that. Is I remember first watching Arsenal when I was like I think it was the 03 or 04 season when they won was when I first saw them. And since then we've had, a few ups, but it's been pretty steadily, just okay. So I think like you said, this season has been like incredible to watch because we know how we want to play. There's a style behind it. We have young, charismatic players. It's fun to watch, and I even feel like rival fans can't argue about that either. Sometimes there's people on your team that rival fans don't like, but currently like young players, talented players, some of them are English. And I just feel like from we start, like you said, I mean, 12-1-1, we were in dreamland if you would have told me that at the beginning of the season. I mean, I think we all had high hopes coming in after signing Zinchenko, Jesus. Like I think, realistically we're like, okay, we finished eighth previous season. Top four, top three would have been pretty solid. And I think that the way we played and like you said, 12-1, but we beat Liverpool, we beat Tottenham, we beat Chelsea in there too, which is huge. I mean, I think for a while that we couldn't win against rivals. I mean, the big games we tied or we lost. So um I'm sure you felt the same way, but man, that it's been fun and it was one of those things where you got your hope up and you were waiting for the other shoe to drop, but so far so good. And I think that this might be the new Arsenal.
I agree, man, and oh, that feels so good to say. We've talked about it on several episodes up until now, you know, about how I feel regarding whether or not we'll win the title. And you
Yeah.
said it right, like with the last several years, waiting for that other shoe to drop. I feel like a lot of Arsenal fans, maybe minus JP, have guarded themselves
Yep.
really heavily when it comes to that stuff because we know what's happened in the past when we've gotten our hopes up, in tournaments and in the league. But I think that what we saw at the end of last season from the team being the youngest team in the Prem by a mile, having the youngest manager, still kind of he had a plan, like you said, but still kind of molding the team, creating that pure starting 11 that we've found this year, was good to see and gave me hope going into this season. But man, I'm going to be honest, I didn't expect it to start out the first half as good as it did, and
I I think that people would have called you crazy if you did though. I mean,
100%.
I even the most optimistic Arsenal fan wasn't saying these things. I mean, I think we all knew trajectory going up, but I'm in a group chat with Dobes, another Man U fan, and they've always been like, Arsenal are going to choke. They always do, and like
We're
to some
waiting.
extent, they're not wrong, unfortunately. But I think that the team's a reflection of the manager, and we couldn't ask for a better guy, mentality wise. So I mean, sky's the limit. It seems like.
He is. Yeah, I saw, several memes about the what is it? The apprentice has become the master. learning under one of the best managers in the game, Pep. I think that Arteta was like in a great position to come back to a
100%.
club that he played for, and I saw an interview with Pep a while ago where he said that when Arteta was under him, that he would cheer every time City scored a goal, except for when they played one team, and that was Arsenal. And then they
Crazy.
showed a video of them scoring against Arsenal, and he's just sitting on the bench with his arms crossed and a straight face. Like, this is where he wants to be.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we don't necessarily see managers go back to a club that they played for and really love being there. A lot of times it's, managers that are career managers, and they they don't have that kind of connection with the club like Arteta does.
Yeah, and even we've seen people go back to their club like Lampard and not do well, for whatever reason. I don't want to get into Lampard as a manager, but like it didn't work at Chelsea, and like you've seen other managers come back to their clubs and it just hasn't worked. So it's even better that like he was not hired because he was an Arsenal player. He's hired because he's an incredible coach. I mean, from all accounts, and from Pep, and he learned from Wenger. And I mean, I feel like with that sort of background, like it's hard to discredit. And it's funny because when he was first hired, people were questioning it. And then obviously, it started off rough, but if you look at the group of players he had starting, there's a reason why it started out rough. I mean, I look back, if you don't mind, his first game as a manager, the starting 11. You ready for this?
Oh yeah.
So Leno, who, fair enough, he's not
Yeah.
bad. He was not too bad, but Maitland-Niles is right back, Socrates, David Luiz, and Saka is left back, which that alone is dangerous.
Yeah.
Torreira, Xhaka, Ozil, Nelson on the right, Aubameyang on the left, and Lacazette, and we subbed in Mustafi, Pepe, and Willock. So I mean,
I forget about some of these guys,
yeah,
especially during that time. I was just kind of numb to it all, but that's a crazy lineup. And
crazy
some
lineup.
of and some of those guys like Luis and Ozil. I'm a huge Ozil fan. He's one of my favorite players of
Yeah,
all time. But we just caught a lot of these guys at the end of their career,
yeah,
unfortunately, or on the downhill at least. And yeah, that's crazy to see that and see where we are now. I think that in the Prem, we've seen it with a lot of teams that a lot of these clubs and owners don't give managers proper time to build a team.
exactly.
With regard to Chelsea, they probably shouldn't be giving Potter that much more time because they're in
Shout
shambles
out
after
Hastings.
spending over 600 mil. But I'm I'm team Arteta all the way, and I'm so glad that they've given him the time to sign the players that he wants to, and I think that shows in the way that we've kind of come to form this season.
100%. And I think that too. I think that I saw the other day, or I think it was yesterday. Potter was talking like trying to compare himself to Arteta, but Arteta inherited a squad full of a lot of deadwood. I mean, I think that's fair to say, and they've invested smartly. With players he wanted. Like I think the more apt comparison is Ten Hag, 100%, because he's coming now. Granted, man, you spent way more money than we have over the past few years, but it's more of a better comparison than Potter because Potter's just spent, I mean, how much? Half a billion, and
Over
and there's no,
600.
and you could see immediately what they wanted to do, and they talked about it. And with Potter, with Brighton, he had a style, but it's tough to see with Chelsea. So I think they were smart to stick with him, but you could see some of the signs creeping through, and the results didn't always hit. But there were other reasons too. A young squad, we had injuries, Party getting hurt in the last couple months last month killed us. I mean, it really did. Then we also lost a couple games we shouldn't have. So I think that you could always kind of see the progress too, which is huge. I remember when we hired after Wenger, we've had a couple managers, and they'd start off hot, and then you couldn't see a style of play, and it's great to see it and know there's a plan, and not have to question why they're doing it or the transfers. The transfers that they've made have been incredible because how many times? I mean, some of those names we read off. We were buying players who were 35, overpaying them, and then we were wondering why we couldn't recoup our money, and they weren't playing well. And it was like, what? Some of it's common sense, even as a fan. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
it's crazy. We had a rough February overall. I'm glad that we ended it with a win against Leicester, Saturday, and hopefully we get a good result against Everton tomorrow. But I think it's safe to say that even the top teams, minus the Invincibles, have ebbs and flows during the season. They lose to teams that they shouldn't. City lost to Tottenham earlier this season. We lost to United in the first half of the season, just teams you shouldn't lose to. Teams do lose to, but I think for me, it's all about how your captain, how your manager keeps, and how as a team you collectively keep each other in check, stay positive, and look forward to the next game without looking too far ahead. And I think that that's something that you know they're doing really well, and we saw that dominating performance against Leicester 1-0. Granted, it was 1-0, but very easily could have been 3-4-0 against them. I don't think they had a single shot on Ramsdale, who's been super consistent and incredible all season, and we'll get to talking about him a little more, especially knowing you were a keeper. But I think as we move into the second half of the season, right now we're sitting 18-3-3, 2 points with a game in hand ahead of City. That feels so good to say. A couple things to highlight for everyone. We have 2 North London derby wins this season against Tottenham, which always feels good. And then aside from that, the other one's probably not even really a highlight, but we handed United their first loss in 2023 and their only loss so far, thanks to an Eddie Nketiah absolute masterclass, bagging 2 goals and one of them being in the 94th minute. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the second half so far? Again, I know we had a bit of a rough February, but kind of looking up until now, what are you thinking?
Well, I think too, one reason we've been so good the whole year in first half, second half is we've had the same back five, including Ramsdale, where Gabriel, Saliba, which has been huge. I mean, that Saliba feels like a new signing. He was on loan and he's been incredible. And Gabriel stepped up his game. And I think that's been one reason why we've switched, along with Zinchenko and Jesus. But I think too, the second half of the season, it's been crazy because we lost Jesus, who most people would have said was one of our better players in the first half of the season. And I remember I have the receipts from Dobes and other people who were like, you guys, that's it. Your season's over. Like, until he comes back, you guys are screwed. And I think that while we've had some stumbles, like you said, even the Invincibles tied a bunch of games. Like there was a streak where they didn't play as well as they could have. And we've had Eddie Nketiah, who is a great player, but has been unproven on the Premier League level to some extent, come in and play really well. And I think it tells a story of Arteta as a manager and the system he plays in, where people can fill in and he's going to try new things and he's going to work and everyone kind of buys into it. I think that's been a huge thing. Now, granted, we would have loved to win games we lost and tied, and some of to be fair, we've had a couple tough decisions go against us, but I still feel optimistic. I mean, I just feel like on any given day we could beat any team. You still have to go out and do it. And the Premier League is by far and large the toughest league. I mean, 1 through 20, every team's going to give you a game, besides maybe the 20th, but you know what I'm saying? I think that, it's interesting to see how it will end up. And I try, you want to get your hopes up, and I think we have such a great chance, but from where we started and where we thought we'd be this season, everything right now is just kind of icing on the cake, it feels like. So I don't know if you feel that way, or if you feel like you could be like, obviously I want to win the league, but people are always saying like, if you don't, it's choke job. It's like this beginning of the year, you guys didn't even have us in the top 4. So exactly. Which one, I mean,
double standard. I know. Yeah. I think that, at this point in the season, I'm just super proud of where we've been to where we are now. I think there's a lot of growth, and like I said earlier, this is a team that I haven't been this excited to watch every single week, and for as long as I can remember. Maybe when we first signed Ozil, back in the day, again, because he's one of my favorites, just to watch him in an Arsenal jersey. But I agree, it's we've got some tough games ahead, and we'll talk a little bit more in a little bit about our thoughts for the rest of the season and kind of what happens there. But I think one thing that's been incremental in our second half of the season has been our January signings, and where Arteta chose to spend money and really add depth to our team. And I think that was the name of the game in this transfer window. I think that in the summer we may look to add some strength in the form of a couple starters here and there, but as far as January went, we were looking at depth, because we did find our, firm starting 11 outside of the Gabby Jesus injury. So I feel like it's only fair to go through those guys and what they've done so far and what we've seen from them.
Yeah. 100%. I was gonna say, if you don't mind, I'll start with Trossard.
Oh yeah,
I
that's what I
feel
was
like
going to
he's
start with.
been. I mean, I really, to be honest, Mudryk, the whole Mudryk thing. I think it was so much money, and he obviously has talent, but he's young, and I forgot who I was talking with, but when you spend that much money, especially where we are right now, like you want someone who's going to come in and add to it. I feel like, and what you're seeing with Chelsea, and Chelsea are their own mess, but I almost feel like if we would have got him, he was still kind of rough around the edges, where he would have come on and he would have played, but I don't know what impact he would have had. And I feel like with Trossard, you kind of know what you're getting because he's been in the Premier League. So I would have liked Mudryk, but I think that Trossard's such a smart signing because, you know, God forbid if Martinelli would have gone down in the beginning of the season, we would have been struggling to figure out who was going to play the left wing. I mean, they would have come up with something, but Trossard, and he kind of offers, he can play anywhere in the front three, it seems like.
100%.
Yeah, and I think that's so valuable because, like we saw with Jesus, what a freak injury in the World Cup, and gosh, you're light up front. So I'm curious what you think. Like, did you want Mudryk? Was that something you wanted, or were you kind of curious about that one?
Yeah, so it's tough. Like there's two sides to that
Yeah,
because the league with his prior team is in a top 5 league in the world. So you see his stats of him scoring all these goals and, making all these incredible plays and, and watching highlights from them, those are great. But
yeah,
like you just said, Premier League proven is a statement that I'm going to carry with me into every signing that we make.
yeah.
Granted, there are exceptions to that, but for the most part, especially outside a top 5 league, even I don't know anybody in their right mind besides Chelsea who would take a chance for that much money and for what is it, like 7 or 8 years that his contract is for. So if we're able to get, somebody who is Premier League proven, yes, he's like 28 years old, so he's a little bit on the higher end age wise, but for 27 million, 26 million after add-ons for
Steal.
somebody who is Premier League proven, scored a hat trick at Anfield earlier this year, can play left wing as we saw on Saturday, false nine. Like I think that watching him play on Saturday he's made great plays and he fits in seamlessly. It seemed in his first game playing with us, he looked like he had been there all season, but especially the way that he played the false nine role against Leicester was super special to me. I think that, we saw him and Odegaard and Martinelli on the left side, like rotating
Yeah, it's
super
awesome.
easily. And no knock on Nketiah whatsoever because he's been great in his own right. But because Trossard's Premier League proven, we can see him do things that Eddie just hasn't developed in his game yet. He can drop deep, he can
100%.
cause havoc with center backs, and he's really, really good in tight spaces and knows where everybody else on the field is. We saw that, in his goal, or sorry, his assist to Martinelli. He megged Sutar wonderfully and
Beautiful.
put it
Yeah,
right on his toes, and Martinelli had a great finish. But like watching him last game was the exact kind of picture that you get when you think of wanting to sign someone who is Premier League proven, even though they're a little older. I think that they just bring a lot of experience.
it came in and made a difference right away. And I'm curious, like for tomorrow for Everton, do you start him in that same role, or do you put back Eddie in?
I So here I was talking about this yesterday on the podcast because Dobes asked me the same question,
Yeah,
and so I'll give you the same answer. I'd like to see him in that position again. I think that, Eddie has dropped form in the last couple games. He's missed chances that he probably shouldn't have. And so for me, when I think of it from like a coaching perspective in any sport, if you've got someone who's playing a position and is starting and they don't have any competition behind them, knowing that Gabby Jesus is injured, so Eddie knows that he's got that starting spot,
yeah,
there's nothing pushing him to get better every single game. So we saw him doing really well when he got his chance, but lately he's been falling off a little bit. And so now that we know that Trossard can play that false nine role and do it really well, I think that starting him again will not only continue kind of the momentum from Saturday, but also, kick Nketiah in the butt a little bit and be like, listen, man, like this isn't your spot now until mid-March when Gabby comes back. Like you still got to fight for this. And so
yeah.
maybe he plays against Trossard plays against Everton and does well or whatever, but then you go back and look at Nketiah in training and see how he adjusts mentally and then on the pitch as well. And I think that it'll only make both of those guys better.
Yeah, and I think too, Eddie's played a lot of games. Like you said, we didn't really have another guy who could fill that role until we got Trossard. Like he's played every game since Jesus got hurt. So to be fair, he's done well at maybe sometimes that many games in a row, young player, take a break, come on as a sub because he can cause havoc. I mean, he's great at the press and just being persistent. So if Trossard's not working for whatever reason, if he does start, then you put on Eddie, and I feel like everyone's confident in his ability to go make something happen. So
Yeah,
yeah.
100%.
All right. All right.
He's
On
fun.
to Jorginho. You gotta
Jorginho.
lead this one because this one heavily criticized signing. Heavily
I criticized it too. I'll be the first one to take that one on the neck. It's like again, as an Arsenal fan, like you take everything with a grain of salt and you don't try too hard to get on one side of the fence or the other, whether you totally agree or totally disagree. And I was more on the disagree side, but at the same time, I kind of changed my mentality when I remembered that again, Arteta was just trying to find depth.
yeah.
Jorginho wasn't a replacement for Thomas Partey. He was a replacement for Mohamed El Neni. And Jorginho is a big step up from where Mohamed El Neni is right now in his career. With having the youngest squad in. So for background, for those who don't know, Jorginho, 30-year-old Italian, played at Chelsea, won a Champions League, a Premier League title. We got him at what I thought was a steal at 12 million. Yes, he's a center defensive mid, and yes, he's 30 years old, but to the youngest team in the Premier League, I think that the championship experience that he brings in the locker room, I think he was a third place Ballon d'Or candidate that 1 year too. I think that the experience he brings to the locker room, in addition to what we've seen him do on the field the last couple games, which has been surprisingly fucking awesome. He brings some insight into winning trophies to this side, this Arsenal side, where for the majority of them, this is their first Premier League title race.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's crazy. It's almost kind of like the Mudryk Trossard thing because we were obviously linked with Caicedo, multiple bids. They kept saying they weren't going to sell, and so he was almost a plan B, if you will. But I almost feel like it works out better because I think that we'll get into this later, but we're linked with Declan Rice. I think that's a dream signing, and I almost feel like if we would have splashed on Caicedo, then that puts us in jeopardy of not getting Rice. And I personally, I'd rather have Jorginho now, Rice in the summer than Caicedo. I don't know. Do you the same, or is that?
Yeah, no, I mean, at this point, after seeing what Jorginho's done, I
Yeah,
wanted Declan Rice over Caicedo in the first place, but I know that West Ham wasn't willing to sell in January, um, so yeah, going back to it and knowing that his plan was depth here, I think that splashing that much money on someone when at the time we were looking at Yuri Tielemans or Declan Rice again, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I'm I think that both the Mudryk signing miss out and the Caicedo signing miss out are both blessings in disguise.
I, it was hard to see it in the moment because you see these names and it for one, it's nice to see us actually splashing cash because before it's usually like, what cut rate guy can we
Yeah.
buy? But I feel like too with Jorginho, it's so interesting because he is a little older, and it's weird because we not a lot of Chelsea Arsenal deals happen, especially in January. But I think with this one, like he wasn't playing much at Chelsea, and it's purely down to the system. Like they're almost in this pure chaos. They have too many players. They don't know kind of what they're playing. But with us and with Party's injury history, I think we all kind of thought he's going to play, especially because Europa League's still available. But he comes in and we keep the ball like we have so much possession. So
His
yeah,
tempo on the field is something that is unmatched in a lot of senses. Like he's so good at knowing when the right time to switch the field is, when the right time to slow the play up is, because as we're a possession based team. We love passing the ball around and finding diagonal balls and stuff like that. And he just has a knack for knowing the exact right time to do it. And he's played in those situations in big games where, he's been forced to figure that stuff out. And I think that we're seeing that. I wanted to shout out, I wrote down a couple notes
yeah,
from his game against Leicester, because aside from Trossard, who had an assist and absolute worldie that got called back, Jorginho was the second man of the match for me. And I think it showed in the stats across both teams. He had the most touches at 95, the most completed passes at 68, the most possessions won at 10, the most tackles made at 3, and then he won 7 duels and had 1 interception. And on top of that, we just saw him control the midfield. Like for a 30-year-old who everybody thought was washed up, that's pretty good knowing the other guys we have in our starting 11.
They were laughing at us too. If you remember, I had plenty of people, Man U fans, Chelsea fans, being like, "What are you guys doing?"
Yeah.
And I think that it's funny because once we signed him, it came out that Arteta's been wanting to stay. They wanted to sign him when Arteta was at City. They wanted to sign him, Arteta specifically, and I think Pep was on board as well. So Arteta's known him and he knows how he plays, and I think this is one where you trust the manager, and I think that he might not be as athletic as Party, but he's more apt to spray the ball forward than Party is, and he's more accurate. And I think he does give us a little edge in that. Now, granted, Party's been incredible for us when he's played, but like you said, he's an improvement on Elneny by a few levels, man. So, and I think we'll still strengthen in the summer. So I think it was one of those ones where it was like, don't spend all the money on a signing that is a rash signing because of where we're at. It's like make a smart signing, someone that can increase the level. Hopefully he's not playing every game, but he's subbing in, and I think he hit that. I mean, from your numbers and that goal against Villa, how important could that be? Oh my God. I went crazy. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think every Arsenal fan in the world did that. That was just what a hit, man.
Yeah. I know. I'll take it hitting off of the back of Emi Martinez's
Yeah,
head, but all that
yeah.
aside, that was an absolute rocket. And yeah, you can't say anything about that because I think that the majority of the world wasn't expecting something like that to come off his foot from that distance.
It deserved to go in first.
Yeah,
I deserve
100%.
to go in, but we'll take it how it goes. I mean,
Yeah. He's known as the penalty kick
yeah,
master, but he can also do that. And I'll take that every day of the week. I think that, you know, he's one of those signings that a manager makes to help them win a trophy.
100%.
And in addition to Trossard, and I think that, we're starting to see that as they get comfortable wearing the red and white. But the last January signing we have is Jakub Kiwior, who I didn't know much about until I started seeing, articles and Arsenal Twitter blowing up about this guy. But apparently he is an absolute baller. We dove into him a little bit later in January, early February, right after the January transfer window was open, and I had time to do my research and watch highlights of this kid. But from everything I've seen, he's a center back that can also play left back. They're calling him the left-footed Ben White, which is cool that he has that ability. I think Ben White's been one of the more consistent players on our team this year. But anyways, Jakub is 23 years old, Polish guy. Lewandowski sang his praises after he trained with the Polish national team late last year. He hasn't gotten any minutes yet this season for us, mainly because of what you said earlier on, that Saliba and Gabriel have just been outstanding, and knock on wood, they haven't had any injuries yet. But before I let you talk about him, I'll just preface that, again, he hasn't gotten any time on the first team, hoping that we see him maybe in one of these Europa League fixtures against Sporting coming up. But he did play yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, for our U21s. And he was supposedly the standout player in the first half. And, from articles and stuff that I've read, he was pinging diagonal balls around like he was a midfielder. And for a center back to have the supposed vision that, everybody's describing him to have after playing in the first half of that game, that gets me really excited, because there aren't many center backs in the world that have very well built foot skills, especially at that age. Because the way I see it, if you can ping diagonal balls and put it on guys' feet, put it on wingers' feet, then at 23 years old, then I'm excited to see what you can do, at 25 and so on and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. I've watched. I saw a comp video of his performance yesterday, and it's good to see Emil Smith Rowe playing too. Shout out to him because it's been a long time. But
It has.
I mean, he looked good. I granted it's an under 21 game, so we don't place too much stock in it. But from what we saw, he looked good, and it's interesting. The team he left, apparently, since he left, has done horrible. So I think it kind of speaks. I'm sure there's other factors, but I think that it speaks to his ability. And I there's a quote whenever Arteta bought him and was talking about him right after he signed. He said he's going to revolutionize the way we play in that left center back position. So it's curious to see. I mean, Gabriel has decent feet. And he's good, but I wonder if this is a long term solution to kind of, like you said earlier about Nketiah, like you got to have someone behind him to push to make him that much better and just to keep the competition up. That's something that they've always talked about. So I'm curious to see him. I'm excited to see him play in the Europa League. I'm assuming that's where he'll get some minutes coming up. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but gosh, so far we've had such great luck over the last 2 years, at least with the Edu Arteta era, that I just have confidence in the fact that he's going to be a player, man.
Yeah. And if you think about it a little more, right, we have Zinchenko playing on the left side, who's much more of a free roam left back who likes to move into the midfield, to where that almost forces, our back three, Ben White, Saliba, and Gabriel, to move into a back three at times.
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing that Kiwior can play left back, is left footed, and would play a left center back role in the future and be able to shift over to that left center back position, true left center back in a back three, that gives me all the confidence in the world too. And that, because a lot of times Xhaka has had to drop back for Zinchenko in that left back role if he gets caught up too far. And Gabriel is more of a true center back, not necessarily a wing back in that way. And so I think that Kiwior could unlock the ability for us to play that way more than Gabriel can, despite obviously Gabriel having done really well this season.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's good too because I know Arteta really prioritizes a left-footed left center back. So I think whenever, like I said, Gabriel's injury-wise has been great, and knock on wood, that continues the rest of the season. He's been great, but if he were to have gone down before, I'm curious to see what he would have done. Or I know because at least in the Premier League, because I know he really prioritizes a left foot center back with the way they play. So I think it's good to have. We as you've seen with Liverpool and Chelsea, they've been ravaged with injuries. It's interesting. You got to have a backup and a plan. And so it sounds like, hopefully he gets up to speed pretty quickly with the physicality and the speed of the Premier League. But hopefully sky's the limit with this guy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think it's only proper that before we talk about, who our ideal signings are for the summer, that we kind of talk about. We talked about it a little bit, but as far as what's different between last season and this season, because we see where we are in the table right now versus where we ended last year, and kind of where we were up and down through the table all of last year. And I think it's important to dissect like a little bit more, like what switch flipped to really allow all these guys to mesh and find their groove and know that they're, a family of sorts, and that they can beat anybody on any given day.
Yeah, yeah, gosh, we've touched on a couple points. For me, and I'm curious what you think too, because I mean, we're playing the same style he's wanted to since he moved in. I'm sure there's been some tweaks and everything, but since Arteta's come in, he's had a style and a way he wants to play. I think that it's a combo of things, like being in his second or third year of doing it as players. You now know 100% what he wants, and the training's familiar. And I think getting familiar with the training, the level of training, and then the tactics is huge for a player. Because I can't imagine, Unai Emery was there before. You learn from him, and then it changes so quickly. It does take time to get these things going, especially with young players too. But I also think having the same back five in most of the Premier League games has been huge. You and I both know when you're playing, if you look over and the guy next to you is somebody you never played with, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It takes games to kind of get into that, especially playing defensively. Like I think now everyone kind of knows where everyone is, and we could even still rotate, Tomiyasu for Ben White, and it's not uncomfortable because they've played enough games together. So I think that's a huge reason. And I also think Jesus and Zinchenko, huge signings. I mean, I know it's been talked about, but you can't put, you just can't put too much emphasis on the fact that they've won the league. They know what it's like to be at City and train that way. Arteta, I'm sure, brought a lot of stuff over similar to what they did at City, but having those players who are they're both super, super young still. I mean, I think that's the best part. I'm still surprised they sold them to us, and I think bringing that mentality over and that hunger, I think, has been huge. All that combined, there's more reasons, but Is there? I mean, what do you think?
You
Anything else I missed? I'm
you
sure
you
there's
hit it
more.
on you hit it on the head from an overall perspective, and I think that we're seeing a lot of these young guys that you're talking about outside of signings really bloom this year. A couple academy guys in in Saka, and obviously ESR has been hurt, but Martinelli really found his form.
Yeah,
Odegaard has been, you know, at one point was easily the player of the year for me in the Premier League.
yeah,
But Saka and Odegaard lead our team right now in combined goals and assists. I think that Saka's like 8 goals, 7 assists, and Odegaard's right behind him by a
yeah.
few. And to have that from such young guys in your club is fantastic. Um, we people talk about it all the time, how lucky we got getting Odegaard and him really coming into his form, because getting signed to Real Madrid at such a young age, I think he was like 15 or whatever it was, can put a lot on a kid's back, living up to a certain expectation. And when he came to Arsenal, he's talked about it in interviews, how comfortable he feels here, how this is, a home to him. It
Great
and
to
then
hear.
putting the right players around him, I think really unlocked him and kind of took a lot of weight off his shoulders to where he can captain properly. And I talked about this being a team that I haven't been so excited to watch every week. I'll say it again and again, but
Yep.
you also see it in him and in the guys that he's leading on the field around him. Like he's out there to grind. He's a dog. He's creative. He is shifty, all the right things, but we've been so lucky the player that he's turned into. And I think he's finally comfortable enough that without that weight on his shoulders that he can kind of start molding and continue to mold into the player that everybody thought he was going to be.
Yeah, and I think too, there's two things that when you talk about it, made me think of was one, I think Arteta deserves a lot of credit because we have this young team and he's instilled this belief and this confidence, and also some incoming signings have helped as well. But it's funny you hear a lot of ex-City players and people who have worked with him talk about his man management and his ability to dissect their individual game and take it to the next level. And I think for Odegaard, they seem like almost like a father-son relationship. I know it sounds weird,
It
but like
does.
when you see him after the game, they're hugging and it's so much like I really do think Arteta is just a great. He brings people to the next level. I think that's what's going to be great for us going forward for incoming signings is that people can see that Arteta's taken players who have come in and he's taken them to the next level. Whether it's the system, whether it's the coaching, the individual coaching. I think that that's one thing that's going to be really great. And I think that's been a huge help for all the young players, especially because I think you can look at Saka, Martinelli, are always had talent, but they've taken the next level up. And the other thing too that I was reading before was so Cesc Fabregas came back to the Arsenal training ground a few months ago, and he was just amazed at the differences that have been made since his time. And he and who was giving the tour explained that Arteta was the one that made these changes, and it's kind of reminiscent of what Wenger did when he came in and changed the culture and all that. So it's really cool to see that and hear those things, and it just gets you excited for more games. So
So stoked. Love
yeah,
that. Well, we know where we've been, we know where we are right now, so I think we should kind of not look ahead to the end of the season necessarily yet, but look far enough ahead into the summer and see if the season ended today and we ended where exactly how the table is now. Like we don't want to just be a one-hit wonder
yeah,
in 2023 this season. We want to build a team that can continue to contend and win both trophies domestic and afar. So obviously knowing that, Kroenke's gonna have to splash some cash this summer since we were pretty mild in the amount that we spent in January. Um, I want like your top three signings if everybody that we have signed right now is healthy,
yeah.
and also remembering that Jorginho is on a 1.5 year deal. We didn't sign him for 7 years like Chelsea signed Mudryk. He's more of a short term signing. So knowing that, I want your top three guys that you'd like to see in an Arsenal jersey come next season, and give me a little why.
Okay, okay. So number one, I think for me has to be Declan Rice. Gosh, I go back and forth between Declan Rice and Jude Bellingham. I think that Jude Bellingham has his mindset elsewhere, which fair play. He can go wherever he wants at this point. He's an incredible player. But I think Declan Rice might fit our game a little bit more. I think that what we've seen over the last few years, and you alluded to it with Jorginho only signing for 18 months, is that Party, as good as he's been when he's been available, hasn't been available for some of the big moments. And I think that Declan Rice has an incredible record of playing in every single game, as many as he's been available for. And just like someone I was reading this, they called him a unicorn. Like he does it all. He just scored a banger, and then like all his stats, like you read Jorginho's stats, like he almost had double. Like it's
Yeah.
crazy what he does week in, week out. I think he'd be massive for us. I really do. I think that he would even propel us to better, especially with the young core we have. And he himself is mid 20s, younger 20s. I don't know the age off the top of my head, but I mean, I think that would be a huge, huge signing. So I
He's a
think for
workhorse.
the workhorse. And I think Arteta would even unlock a next level for him too. And that's what gets me so excited.
Yeah,
And I think that that's a realistic signing too.
100%. I think what's cool about him is that, you know, Shaka has come into form. I think in previous years, a lot of people would say that, he was one of the more hated guys in the Premier League, but
Yeah.
he's calmed down a whole lot this season and focused on his game and done really well. But, you know, when we watch Declan Rice play for West Ham, there are many times where he becomes more of a box to box midfielder than necessarily a center defensive mid. And should Arteta choose to use him in this way, I can't read his mind, but I could see a situation where we use him as a number 8, as a box
Sure.
to box midfielder next to Thomas Partey that can kind of get up and get back. And he has much more of a gas tank than Thomas Partey does, obviously. But I think it would be really cool to kind of mess with that. And, again, if we get him, that could be a fun combination of Party, Declan Rice, and Martin Odegaard in the middle.
And I think he gives you the ability to do that. Like, I obviously will be in, Europe next year. So for the first time in several years, so at least Champions League wise. So I think that it'll be huge to have that kind of quality around the club. I mean, I think that, when we look at Europa League games we played in this year, it's been a decent drop off, when we sub in some of our backup players. And I think that
Yeah.
where we're at now with the core and who we have, we don't need as many signings, but we need level changers when we do sign them.
Yep.
Or we need exciting young talent. I think those are the two, and we've been good about that. But that's why I think he fits. He's perfect. I mean,
Yeah.
that would be a dream signing. If that's I'm buying a Rice jersey the next day if that
The
happens.
minute, man.
Happens.
Yeah.
Hopefully next year's are sick, but he's my number one.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. Who else you got?
so it's tough. I'm going back and forth. We were prepping for this, and if we would have not got Trossard, I would have told you that I wanted Rafael Leao from AC Milan. I watched a little bit of Serie A, but every time I watch him play, and even for Portugal, the little times he did play in the World Cup, he is an incredible talent. He's a young player. He's kind of Saka-esque in the way he plays on the left wing, though, and he's rapid. And I mean, every time I watch him play Champions League, Serie A, he's the best player on the field. Like, and every word coming out of the team is he is incredible. And I know that his contract, he stalled in his renewals, and he's mentioned that he loves Arsenal. Like, they always give those little things, or like,
Yeah.
I admire Arsenal, and it's like, but now it's tough because we have Trossard, we have Martinelli. So I'm remiss to say that. So I think that depending on what Arteta and I do want to do, like if they want to strengthen the right wing now, instead of Saka doesn't have a true backup, but we have Reece Nelson, but I'm not convinced. I mean, he's young, but I think that with what we're going to be in next year, and if we want to challenge for all the trophies, like you said, I think right wing would be the place to go. So if that's the case, and Leao doesn't want to play right wing or whatever reason that doesn't happen, I go back and forth. I Musa Diaby at Bayer Leverkusen, really good young talent,
It's electric.
electric. They're similar in a way, those two, and he can play center forward. He can play right wing. So I'm curious. What do you think? Because we need someone in the front three. We need to sign one incredible player, like whether it's center forward, to back up Jesus, depending on what you think of Nketiah, or right wing. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like the Diaby take.
Yeah,
I don't know off the top of my head what his market value is or what Leverkusen would want
we're
for him.
asking 80 million, I think, in January,
Okay.
somewhere in that region.
Yeah,
So
so that's a good chunk, especially if we spend, 70, 80 million on Declan Rice. But, again, we saved money in January. I think we spent like $58 million total, something close to that, in January, which is like for three players that are going to be impact players for us. I think that we did fantastic there. So that should unlock the ability, assuming Kroenke wants to spend the money to buy, two high dollar guys in the summer and then maybe a third,
we should have money coming in too with the league, and hopefully some sign.
100%. And I think that this is something that we should follow up after we talk about this. But you know, I'm gonna speak as though we're not getting Declan Rice and um we're not getting Diaby or whoever. So outside of those two guys that you mentioned, if you had to narrow your three down to those based on what we have in the side right now, it would be Diaby and Declan Rice. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, and I love those takes. But for the sake of difference, I've seen a lot of articles recently about Marco Asensio from Real
Yeah,
Madrid, center forward and right wing, incredible talent. He's won three Champions Leagues with Madrid, three La
crazy.
Ligas, three Club World Cups, and three, what was it? Spanish Super Cups. So like similar to Jorginho in that he's got the champion experience. He is
Yeah,
an absolute baller. He's got like that flair that Saka's got flair, but not the same kind of Spanish
sure.
flair that
Yeah,
Marco Asensio has. And I think he's got that Spanish link with Arteta. That could be really cool. But at Real Madrid, when we have watched him, he's been great. But in 2023, he's, I think, played a full 90 minutes one time.
yeah.
So he's been struggling for minutes there. I know that their team is, they're doing okay, but on paper, their team is stacked. So it's one of those guys that, if he's not getting a ton of minutes there to come to a team that I think is better than Real Madrid right now, that might be a hot take, but I think we are.
Hot take.
Um, you know, Splitting time or battling with Saka for time in that spot could be one of those impact players with the experience that we talked about. No, he's not Premier League proven, but he's Champions League proven, and he's several other tournaments proven. So I think he'd be a cool addition, knowing that he's not getting a ton of time there. And then the other guy, was somebody who kind of came up on my radar recently, Milinkovic Savic
Yeah,
from Lazio, center mid,
stud.
absolute baller. He'd be one of those guys that would play that box to box number 8 midfielder role over Shaka. Um, at least for the next year and a half until Jorginho's contract is up. But his rumored fee is like 34 million, which isn't a lot for somebody that's
Yeah.
on a Lazio team that's like 15 or 14 points ahead of second place Inter Milan, and is leading this team currently to like a 21-1-1 record. I think they've lost like one game, and that guy is fun to watch.
Fun to watch. He's a stud, man. I mean,
Yeah,
I watched him in the World Cup and through Serie A. Like, he's an incredible player, and that seems like such a steal too. I don't know how he is, but man, there's a couple. I'm curious though. Do you think Rice is number one and then he's a backup? Because I know it seems like with the January signings, there's always a plan B. There's always a smart
yeah.
signing second. So I think that's what it'll end up being.
It's tough because a lot of this is super early rumors.
Sure.
Aside from the guys that we've known that we've tried to go get in the past, like Caicedo, who's they're gonna wait until the summer or whenever to let him go. Declan Rice wanted to play Champions League last January when we tried to sign him, and
One over.
we weren't planning to get there exactly. So
Sure.
now that that's there, I plan B. If you would have asked me before our game against Leicester on Saturday, I would have said Yuri Tielemans because
Yeah,
we tried to go after him before, but
an interesting one.
yeah, and he would have been he like plays Party's position hard, like center defensive mid through and through. but he got that knock in the game against us on Saturday, and I think it was like a ligament
Oh,
uh,
was it?
a ligament injury in his ankle, and those things supposedly reoccur very easily after you've had them once. So knowing that he's been semi-injury prone for Leicester in the past, that would kind of turn me off of him a little bit if I was Arteta,
On a
seeing
free throw?
he's gonna be out like 6 weeks with this injury, and then when he does come back, if he gets hurt again before the end of the season, I don't think that we go after somebody that's injury prone. Um,
I'm curious on like his contract's up in the summer. I
right.
think he's gonna move.
Free
You know,
transfer.
and it's interesting because we've been linked with them since last summer, and I don't know if like they're not convinced or if they're just playing it super smart. Where they're like, we'll buy it. We're gonna get you. Don't worry about it. Just hang tight. We'll buy you. We'll get you in summer for free. Like I'm torn. I don't know which way it's going because we've been linked with them summer, January, in
Every
between.
time.
Yeah, it's like, and he's a quality player. I think that there's no doubt he's a quality player. With his injury history, that's something to be looking at. But it's one of those things like on a free transfer, you know, it solves a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Would you take him?
If we get Declan Rice, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and I'll just leave it at that. But
Sure.
if
Sure.
we don't get Declan, I think it's a different conversation, and I think that we'd have to look closer at his injury and his physical and his ability to not get re-injured before we start looking at other holding mids or other number eights around the league. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Sure.
But
Let
I
me.
think that's a pretty solid list, and I think the one other guy that we should probably touch on, otherwise we'll get some crap for not doing it, was someone who came up in the last couple days, Raheem Sterling. Supposedly
Yes.
could be a shock transfer for us this summer. What Chelsea signed him last summer, and he's been super underwhelming, kind of like the rest of their team has been all season.
Chelsea in
Uh,
general.
yeah, and he was an expensive signing for them. But how do you feel about Arteta adding depth to our front three? Because we know Sterling has played in all front three positions for Manchester City over his
Yeah.
years of doing really well. But knowing if Arteta wanted to add depth to our front three and he signs Raheem Sterling in the summer, how does that make you feel?
I would say cautiously optimistic would be the best way to say it, because
Yeah,
I trust Arteta. I trust Edu. Arteta's worked with them, so I mean that for me is a sign of approval. He knows the player. It's one thing when you're buying a player who you've seen on tape and you've watched live, but you don't know, one on one. So I trust it from that perspective. What I'm curious though, he plays left wing for Chelsea currently. We have Trossard, we have Martinelli. I think for me, it comes down to how much it's going to cost. That's a big factor. Like he's not someone I'd break the bank for, personally speaking.
yeah,
I think more exciting options. And then I also think it comes down to what we do for right wing and center forward. Because I think Jesus can play on the wing. I think he's just been so great for us going to the middle. I think that really it's going to come down to a decision between, is Eddie Nketiah the backup? Do we buy another striker? Like, I love Ivan Toney. I love João Felix. I think they both are a little bit more similar to what Jesus does. I think those would be great additions if they're even available. But I know we're kind of playing like, I'm not being as definitive as I'd like, but
yeah,
it's tough. I almost think we need a backup forward or someone who can play center forward, right wing, more than we
yeah.
need someone like Sterling that can play. It's mostly left wing, although he does do all three. So to wrap it up,
We know where he's strong at, right?
yes, yes. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
Oh,
Tough
I
one.
mean, yeah, like if you just asked me to make a decision based on watching him at Chelsea, I would say absolutely not.
Yeah.
But what I try to remind myself, and I try to look at it from both sides. And if you do that, you see that no, he hasn't been great at Chelsea, but Chelsea play a style of football that not even a lot of Chelsea fans like to watch. There's no identity in the way they play. So if you can,
Uncomplicated.
if you can bring a player like you just said, Arteta knows the guy has talent. He's got like over 120 something, 30 something goals for City in his time there. That's a lot of goals.
Not goals.
And you put him in a system that he would fit into, similar to how he fit into City style. And so we know he would fit into Arsenal style because they're similar styles, possession based, fast wingers, attacking wing backs, diagonal balls, etc. I think that you could make a case for him. But then you
Yeah.
could also make the case that his form at Chelsea is due to him just being on the decline
Sure.
overall. And I think a lot of people call him out on that when he plays for the English national team too. So
Yeah.
it's tough, and I see both sides, but
Yep. I think there's more exciting options. End of the day,
yep,
I think full stop. That's where I feel, and I think that there's people that better suited for what we need: a center forward, backup, right wing, backup. I think
yep,
that's kind of. I wouldn't hate it. I think that he's probably one of a few options, like, as we've seen. I really do think he's on the list. How about that?
yep. Well, I think with that being said, you took two of my preferred signings, but I think we can agree that Diaby and Declan Rice should be our two biggest targets this summer. And then, depending on how much we want to spend in addition to that, again, we can cross that bridge when we get to it. But I like the Diaby and Declan Rice shout. So we'll see what happens.
I think we're gonna make some money too. I think we're gonna sell some players, get some deadwood out, some exciting young players too. So
Yeah, that's the next thing
yeah,
that I want to talk about, because when that happens, obviously we've added some guys and added depth, but with that, sorry to keep not sorry to keep knocking on Chelsea, but like Chelsea's going to have a fire sale after signing 75 guys in the last two transfer windows,
yeah,
and then there are other 75 guys coming back from injury.
I
But
know.
we'll probably have to get rid of some guys too, and two guys that one of my buddies, Matt Pearson, who's a big Arsenal fan too, I was talking to him earlier about us doing this episode, this Mecca Moments on Arsenal, and I was like, I want to touch on these key things, but I want to make sure that we hit some more in-depth stuff. And so what were your thoughts on that? And he's like, well, I'd love to know, I have my own thoughts, but what do you think happens to Emil Smith Rowe and Kieran Tierney in the summer? Depth is king, but will they be okay with limited minutes? Like, do we cash in on these guys now? Just straight to the point, simple. What do you think? What do you think we should do with these guys this summer, knowing who we signed and who, in a perfect world, we sign in the summer?
Sure. Emil Smith Rowe for me is untouchable. I think he has to stay. From what we saw last year, he was one of our top goal scorers last year. As young as he is, and he's had his injury history, and from what I understand, he had a groin injury that's been bothering him for a few years, and he had it taken care of. So I think, knock on wood, he should be long term better, and he's a special talent, man. So for me, there's no question he stays. No amount of money. I mean, there is an amount of money that would have. For now, he stays. Tierney is so interesting to me because he is he when we bought him, I mean, we thought we were set for years. I didn't ever think we'd have to upgrade that position for a while. He's had injury problems. He doesn't. I mean, Zinchenko is a unicorn in the sense that Declan Rice is, because of how he plays and how technical he is. So, but I think there's times when Tierney makes sense to play, and Tomiyasu has made his way over the left side previously, but I'm torn. I love KT. I love him. I love his mentality. I love his work ethic. Like, what are your thoughts, man? I'm torn. I'm
Yeah,
torn.
I'll go backwards on these two. So
Yeah,
yeah, I agree. Like every Arsenal fan loves KT. I think that he's
yeah.
been like a fan favorite ever since he joined the club. And, it's one of those things like, what do you do with a guy that, is too good for the bench, but too good to sell without even thinking about it? I'm sure he was frustrated when Zinchenko took his starting spot,
Mhm.
but for me, the way that he plays left back is he loves those overlapping runs. And so if you think about our left wing in Gabriel Martinelli, he loves to keep his feet on the sideline, receive a pass, and take on the defender one on one. So if he continues to get more comfortable with letting Tierney overlap him on the left wing, and then he shifts into the middle, I think it makes a lot more sense. But for the way that Martinelli likes to play on that left wing, you know, I feel like a decent matchup would be Trossard on the left and Tierney at left back, because we know Trossard loves to cut in.
Yeah.
But for if Gabby Martinelli's starting, I think that you have to keep Zinchenko in there because of his ability to roam to the middle of the field and find him on that wing. So again, it's tough. Like Emil Smith Rowe, I don't think there's a correct answer yet. I think to me it makes sense to sell him this summer. I'd love to keep him as depth, but
Okay.
like I said, I love the guy and I'm such a big fan of him. The tough part is going to be finding a cheaper replacement that can do the job and is also liked as much by all of us as KT is. So like if I could have both, I'd take both, but I don't really it's then you got to get into the conversation of who else do you get rid of
Sure.
if you don't get rid of like one of these guys or somebody else. We can get rid of Rob Holding if we want to,
Okay.
but um assuming we can get a good fee for him because he's still young and he's liked by everybody and he's a hard worker. I think it's something that could benefit us too if we get the right price for him. But
Sure.
I'm like all of this, I could make a case for him to stay, and I can make a case to get
Well,
to catch in.
granted, unless a crazy thing happens, we're going to be Champions League. Like, there's going to be plenty of games to play. Personally, I'd love to keep him. I think that Zinchenko and Tierney have both shown that they pick up the odd knock here and there. So
Yeah,
I think I ideally would love to keep them. We have some exciting talents coming out of the academy. So I think that if we can hold on and keep everybody happy, at least for another few years, I'm cool with that.
yeah.
Now let me ask, I got two for you if you don't mind.
Oh yeah,
All right. So, um, let's see. So, Pepe, Nicholas Pepe, on loan. You're going with him.
dude. So much money.
Oh,
Yeah, so he's on loan for a reason, and it's not because he's an academy guy that's coming up or he's 19 years old and we just need to get him some minutes. Like we gave him minutes at Arsenal last season and it was underwhelming.
yeah.
He had his moments, but I couldn't even tell you what his price tag was, but I know that it was a good chunk.
23 million, I
Yeah, it
believe.
was a good chunk of change. I think like he was one of our most expensive signings at the
Yeah.
time that we signed him. The shitty part is we're not going to get 73 million for him. So,
20,
you
30
know, yeah, so he's not going to play over Saka. I'd rather just cut our losses and send him to France or somewhere and get
Get some money.
X amount of dollars for
Yeah.
him. Even if it's 30 million or 35 million, he's probably worth more than that. But um, cut our losses there and then put that money towards Diaby, 100%.
He's gone. Okay.
Yeah,
Two more. Tavares. Been
yeah,
impressed with his loan.
yeah.
Goes
So
back to Tierney as well. I think that all that kind of intermingles.
yeah, that's so true. And I don't know when these guys get back exactly, but I know he's doing well on his loan spell. And when I look at him, I remember reading an article that he either did or still does train in the off season with Yaya Toure.
Wow.
Yeah, to kind of build his technique in a similar way. Um, and so with that being said, that was a great
Yeah.
loan spell for us, or it was great to send him out on loan because he was in that exact kind of situation where he's a younger kid,
Come
wasn't
back.
getting minutes in the first team, but he needed to be playing in the first team somewhere. And so I think I'd like to see him come back and stay.
Okay.
When he was getting minutes in our first team, he wasn't doing really well, but he's I he's
You
still
saw signs. You saw signs. I
yeah,
think I'm with
you
you on
see
that.
little things that you're like, okay, I know he can do this. What is it going to take for him to do those things consistently?
Okay.
And I think that one of those is getting him 90 minutes or 70 minutes or whatever, for another club temporarily, knowing that when he comes back he's going to be fighting for a spot and is going to come back with that consistency. So for the time being, like what you said, you see those little things, I see those little things, and I want to give him a chance um, before he comes back. Maybe he comes back, does really well, gets some starts, his value shoots up, and then maybe we get rid of him,
Smart business.
depending on how Thomas Partey stays long term. But that's as for right now what I
Okay.
think the plan should be.
All right. Last one I got for you. This one I think for me is the hardest. Is Balogun, Ooh,
Oh, bro, he's tearing it up.
tearing it up. Young player.
Yeah.
I mean, you got
Oh,
him and Eddie and Jesus.
yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah, man. And I know, did you see what his price tag is by chance right now with
I
what
thought
or what his value
350.
is?
Is
Yeah.
that
So
like,
I think that he's shining right now. You got to remember that the French League One isn't the Premier League. So take that with a grain of salt. But at the end of the day, he's still the leading scorer in League One, um, which is still a top five league in the world. So
U.S. national team potential
yeah,
player?
yeah, that would be
Exciting.
insane.
Yeah.
I'll take him all day. But on that team, similar situation to Nuno Tavares in my opinion, because again, neither both of them are doing really well, but neither of them are in the Premier League. So you bring them back whenever their loan spells up. You get them some minutes and see how they do.
Sure.
Not just a few games though. Like I'd give them a handful or more to kind of get reacclimated in addition to training with the team,
Sure.
and and then see how they do, you know, in Premier League games and decide from there. Again, pending when their loans are up, we should have a little bit of time before the next January or the next summer window when they come back to make a decision before that. But the dangerous part is that they come back here and they shit the bed,
Yeah. Lose
like
the money.
their value goes back down. So it's one of those things that, based on who you're bringing in and who you're letting go, where do you just like bite the bullet and pray that you're making a good financial decision, but knowing that he is at the end of the day an Arsenal player, both of these guys, all three of these guys, you want to hope in your boys that they're going to come back and do really well. And I think that generally speaking, that's where my head and my heart is going to be. Like
Yeah.
they're still gunners. Like I want them to come back and absolutely kill it. I don't want to just send them out on a loan just to make money off them immediately. So
Yeah, you
what do you
you have
think?
interest in their future. I think that between Eddie and Balogun, I think one has to go. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not opposed to loaning, Balogun back out. You've seen him develop. I think he has a bright future, but I think that if you were to sell this summer, might be after the season he's having this summer, might be the one because that, like you said, the French league is what it is, and we know that. And like his stock's really high, and I think it comes down to if you think Eddie's the man, which I think people are torn about. Eddie's young and he's shown great things, but that's going to be a tough decision that Arteta and Eddie make, and I trust him to make it. But I think for me, that's the hardest one out of the ones we mentioned.
Yeah.
That's quality. It's a good problem to have, but we need some money coming in so we can buy players to improve the core of the team. So I'm not opposed to selling if we think Eddie's the man, vice versa. So that's where I feel
So
right.
so so going back on your three guys, you have to just say buy or sell, no reasons why. What are your
Okay.
what are your exact answers?
Um, who was first? Who was first? Uh, well, I'll go with Nuno. Nuno, I think we sell him. I think that the reason being, he's had
Yeah.
behavioral issues. You know what I mean? Him and Arteta butted heads. I think that we cash in. I think that if with that said, we keep KT. I think with Pepe we sell 100%, no questions asked. Get whatever money we can, spend on somebody else. Again, I think they're gonna end up selling him, or they sell Eddie, which either way you're gonna get a decent sum of money. So I'm okay with. So
Yeah.
cheers. Yeah,
No, I don't disagree at all. So
yeah.
that's good to hear. Um, so I backing up a little bit, we've got 14 games left in the season. Um, I have three questions for you.
Okay.
They all kind of go in line together, but what do we need to do the rest of the season to win the title? What games are you worried about specifically the rest of this season? And you can look up our schedule if you don't know off the top of your head. And then, this is the closest we've been to a title since like you said, since 2004. If we don't win the league this year, do you consider this season a failure?
Okay. So
So
first, I would say one, it's going to be huge to get Jesus back. I think the sooner we get him back, I think that propels us to that next level we saw before the break. Because I think there has been a bit of a drop. I think we've still played really well, but I think that he's the piece. He unlocks Martinelli. He connects so well with the left side, with the right side. He does so much. And I know that he was on a goal drop before he got hurt, but when you watch the game, if you watch the games and you have any tactical awareness at all, you can tell that guy's a player and he connects so many things. And especially when teams play a low block against us, which is the bulk of the teams now, he unlocks it. And I think I'd love to play City and these teams full strength because I don't want to have any reservations when the season's over. Like, well, we had injuries. Like, I hate to make that excuse. I think we have to stay healthy. I think Party and the dynamic between Party and Jorginho is going to be interesting to see what Arteta does. But I think staying healthy, we're going to need a little bit of luck along the way, and getting Jesus back is going to be huge.
Yeah,
So,
I think so too.
anything I missed?
No, I think you're right. You know, I say it a lot on our podcast when we record Monday nights, that because I get asked that question
Yeah,
pretty much every week that we're at the top of the table, which has been a lot lately.
yeah.
Um,
Can
and
you?
and for me, in addition to like getting our guys back and playing teams full strength, it's taking it one game at a time. You know, for such a young team, it can be super easy for these guys to like look ahead and think if the league ended today, we're good to go.
Yeah,
But we're not. You know, we're 2 points ahead of City right now, 5 if we win tomorrow. So we need to be taking it one game at a time, focus on that opponent, not worrying about, if we play City or Newcastle or Liverpool the game after, or whatever the case is, like focus on Everton tomorrow, take that, move to the next one, train for that one. And then, Gabby comes back, like, I think he should be back for the Crystal Palace game on the 19th, 18th, or 19th.
I'm
Knock on
praying.
wood. He posted on IG today a picture of him in training. So, one of those things that you just love to see on a Tuesday afternoon from your striker. Got me super excited. I was in a work meeting, and we had like a 5 minute break or whatever, and
Yeah.
I was scrolling through Arsenal Instagram and saw him
Same,
post, and I was like, let's
same.
freaking go.
Took a
So
moment, man. I was like,
yeah,
please.
yeah,
Eddie's been great and Trossard's been great in there, but he's a different beast, man.
yeah, yeah.
So
Well then, so we know we need to do. What games are you most worried about, if any, the rest of the season? And I'm
yeah,
assuming there's not a ton of them, because when you look at it, I think we have, both us and City have 2 of the 4 easiest remaining schedules. I think
yeah.
I read somewhere, based on who we play. Obviously, we play each other, but we, like, the both of us have 2 of the 4 easiest schedules left.
I would say so I have the next 5 games in front of me, and it's just for those listening, it's Everton, Bournemouth, Fulham, Palace, Leeds, and then the next 6 games is Liverpool. So, like, I think we take care of business against Everton. I think that new manager bounce and just a little bit naivety maybe from us plays a role, but I think that it's going to just come down to grinding out results. I think Fulham are a good team. I think that'll be an interesting game. The last time we played them, Gabriel scored late to win, so that'll be a good game. Liverpool, for me, I think coming up is the game I'm worried about the most, just because of our record against them over the
Yeah.
past couple of years. I mean, I can't tell you how hyped it was when we beat them, because they have just been the one that we couldn't get past, and they've been great too. So don't get me wrong; it's not like it's been a fluke. They've been incredible the last few seasons. So, but I think that win early on in the season gave us some belief. Obviously, City. I when we play City, I want it to be full strength, because when we played them both times previously, we've had a couple injuries, and I think we played them really well. And I think when you looked at the stats after the game, and I know the game is won on the field, but expected goals, we were better. We had more percentage possession. We had more passes. So I think there was a lot of positives to take from it regarding the result, even though we did lose. If you look at our past results against them, it's slowly ticking up to better performances, better chances. The games are to be won. So we had a couple mistakes too, which you can't give them. They're too clinical. So
And way too deep.
way too deep. Let me see. We played Chelsea again, which, I mean, I think Liverpool.
Newcastle's the only
Yes,
only other game for me,
yeah, and
besides,
Brighton.
like, I had 3 on my list, and it was
Yeah,
City, Fulham, knowing how they've played a lot of the other Big Six clubs, and Newcastle, who are still super defensively sound, but similarly to how we've progressed continually against Manchester City and how we played Leicester, last weekend, we'll outpossess them.
Yeah.
It's all about that. Excuse me. It's all about that quality in the final third. I think is something that we've been missing. We continue against all of these teams. There have been very few times this season where we've been outpossessed by a team, and so that should equate to more goals, but it doesn't always because we get hurt on the counter sometimes. So in Newcastle, especially, we're going to have a lot more possession. What can we do with it? Can we have that little bit of quality in the final third and convert and
Yeah.
create big chances? Because especially in February, we were doing exactly that, but missing those, again, that last little bit of creativity and creating big chances in the final third. So for me, against Newcastle, that's going to be key, assuming all of our guys are healthy, which, assuming we don't get any more injuries, they should be, since that's at the beginning of May. So
I think too the key to a lot of these games, especially teams that sit back, if we can score early, it makes them have to chase the game, and then we punish them on that. I think that's going to be a key too. And I think Jesus does that for us too. But like you said, one game at a time. Control the controllables. I think what's in our favor too. City played Newcastle and Liverpool in their next 5 games. Two, Liverpool, I always have their number. Newcastle, the last time they tied, it was a great game. So I think for us, that's huge. So if we take care of our business and we get a little luck, we might be looking good in the next 5 games. And I also think that City are going to have to make a choice. I know with the Champions League,
yep.
they're going to have to make a choice. I mean, they have a deep squad, but I think that, like you saw with Man U losing Ericsson in FA Cup game, I think it was, like those games, you lose a player like that, an important player in a game, it does affect the Premier League. So I think there's so many different things that can happen over the next few months. It's going to be so interesting. Every game, the Premier League's exciting. So I, I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the most I can, man. I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
that's
Well, if we don't win the Premier League, is it a failure this season?
no, no, no. I think that I've gone back and forth. I think that we can't get blinded by the hype. Now, do I think this is our best chance? Maybe even over the next year or two? Yes, yes. I mean, City are having a down year by their standards. Liverpool as well with injuries. Um, but again, if you go back to the beginning of the season for a little bit of perspective, if you would have told me we were at the spot, if you'd have told me we finished second, I would have grabbed your hand. Now, it's all to play for. But I think that the reason why it's not a failure too, and I think this is important because I don't want people to think like, oh, they don't, they're not used to winning things. I think that who we have as a core is why it's so exciting and why it's not a failure, because we're only going to get better. We're not taking a step down. We're not like Liverpool, where a lot of their players were in their peak and they are now on the decline, which I think is part of their problem. But we're at the point where, like, all of our players are in their young 20s for the most part. So if we keep adding additions to it, I think for the next 5 years, comfortably saying we're going to be competing for everything. As long as we keep the progress and as long as we keep our core players. That's why I think it's not a failure. I'm curious to see what you think, and I know I've heard Doves and other people say it is, but I think it's tough to say that.
Yeah. Yeah, the way that I look at it, I don't think it's a failure either. Um, I think it's a continuation of taking steps in the right direction to build a dynasty. Like, at the end of the day, a lot of the Big Six clubs have had dynasties over time, and we haven't really had one in the last several years, really since the last time we won a Premier League. So, like, how do we really build a good base of a team with good young players, which we've done? Like, to me, we're at the beginning of that.
I think so
I
too.
think we're at the beginning of a long run of really good years, knock on wood. And so whether that starts with a Premier League title or not, um, I'm super stoked to continue to watch them in the coming years.
Yeah.
However, I would love to win it this year. And
Oh my
like you
God.
said, I think that this is our best chance. I got a cannon tattoo on my thigh before the end, or sorry, after last season. And so this has been like the perfect time to do that unknowingly,
That's the
that
good
this
luck.
was going to happen. Yeah. So
I told Dobes this whenever Jorginho scored that banger against Villa and then we ended up winning. I called him and just screamed Jorginho at him, and we started talking, and I was like, if they win the league, I'm gonna fly to London. Like I just don't know if like I could stop myself from doing that
Yeah,
and just celebrate because
I'll go with you.
yeah, please, honestly, anyone listening is an Arsenal fan, come with us because we've waited almost 20 years. I mean, and just the constant ups and downs. We've never had a chance, and it's nowhere near what Tottenham have had. Don't get me wrong; that's a whole nother story. But like we're a big club. These are things that we should be doing. So man, and I think too, one more thing is next year's gonna be more complicated with Champions League, with all the cups, and now that we've done this year, the pressure is on. Like right now, we're the underdogs. It's not as big of a deal, but when the season's over and we finish where we finish, the pressure's on as well. So that brings on more challenges, more mental attitude. So man,
I think we're fully capable of doing it. And the
yeah.
and the one thing I kind of want to weave into this, like with the squad that we have, we're fully capable of doing this looking at the schedule for the rest of the season. But when you look at it as we just drew Sporting for the next round of Europa League.
Mhm.
So if you're Arteta, do you start rotating subs in? And Henry used the word bottling the Europa League in order to win the Premier League, which I don't think would be the correct terminology. I think that
No,
if you choose to play subs and focus on the Premier League and winning that title, I don't think that that's bottling Europa whatsoever. I think that it's just like choosing to
smart
value
management.
one trophy more than the other. I think that if we played our starters in Europa League and we lose, then that would be considered a bottle job in ways because we're one of the favorites. But if you're Arteta, we drew Sporting, so it'll be a reunion with Hector Bellerin, which will be cool. Um, do you play? Is this the time to fill in the subs, whether it's in the first leg, second leg, or both legs, or do you try and win them both? I know in a perfect world we want to win them both, but for the
Yeah.
sake of the amount of games we'll be playing and keeping guys healthy and fit, what do you do?
I went back and forth on this because I know we talked about this, setting this up. I and what I settled on was I think I think no disrespect to Sporting, I think we play a hybrid of teams because I think the benefit to what we have is we have a lot of young players who are able to play every 3 days, and we've been out of the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup for a while, so we've played less games I think than what we will next season, what we have previously. So I think that's on our side. I think generally we've had a pretty good season as far as injury goes. Most people have been healthy. A few on the list, Party obviously. I really do think we play some of the exciting young talent, and we mix though because what he's done in the past too. If you watch some of the other games, he's played Odegaard, but then he's thrown in Vieira, or he's played Martinelli, and then he's played Nketiah instead of Jesus at the time. So I think that what we'll play, I think Matt Turner will play. I think that you'll see. I think Kiwi will play. I'm excited to see him play. I think Tierney will play. I think what you'll see is a hybrid, but I say that, and then with one asterisk being, if we get to the semis, I think you play your strongest team.
Yeah,
I think it gets there. There comes a point where it doesn't make sense to put in your B team. I think you play your dogs because it's a trophy on the line. Like I almost think, I mean, we're in the final 16. I think you kind of play the hybrid, and then once if you get further down the line and we're there, I think you play them. It's a big trophy. Don't get me wrong. It's a European trophy. It's not the Champions League, but I think that's kind of what I feel like. Where you at? What are your
no,
thoughts?
I'm in the same boat. I think that the semifinal shout is a really, really good one.
Yeah.
Um, when we talked about it last night, with the rest of the guys, I wasn't looking that far ahead. I was looking more to the round of 16 against Sporting, and I kind of said a similar thing of we get a couple of these guys in that haven't gotten a ton of minutes in the Premier League, but have still gotten minutes in Europa League this season, and put those guys in the first leg. Um, or sorry, against Sporting, maybe whether that's in the first leg or second leg. For me, I think that we start our boys, our starting 11 in the first leg because it's away, and getting those away goals on aggregate could be huge and allow us to really have a high. And maybe we put in one or two guys and make a semi hybrid starting 11 in the first leg away, but really make sure that we bang in some goals at in Lisbon, in the first leg, and then the next leg, the second leg, we can we can go half and half or whatever the case is with starting 11. But yeah, I agree. When we get to the semis, I think it's balls to the wall, put your dogs in, get a result, win a trophy. Yeah, I'm with you.
I think too, like we've seen Arteta and just knowing him and his personality, I think that he wants to win both. I know that everyone's like, focus on the Premier League, and I'm in a total agreement with that. But I think he's got his mind on both to some degree. And I think you have to, if you're gonna be the big club that we are, you have to look at both. And he's gonna give us the best chance both ways. And I think that what you'll see is he'll sub in if Saka, Martinelli, etc., don't start, he'll sub them in 60 minutes. Like they will play. I don't think it's a matter of them not playing. It's a matter of less minutes. I think that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I agree. Man, it's going to be a fun rest of the season.
You're right about that, man.
And I could keep rambling on for hours, but I guess that means we're just going to have to do a part 2 of this at some time,
Yes,
maybe
sir.
after the season's over. But yeah, bro, thanks again, Nate, for hopping on here. This was like there aren't a lot of times where I get to dive this deep into Arsenal on the pod with anybody. Everybody else supports something different, a different team, but this has been awesome and gets me even more pumped to kind of see where the lads go the rest of the season. But I think we're in a pretty good. I'd rather be one game ahead with 2 points in the bank in first place over City than the other way around, trying to chase that team. So with that being said, thanks everybody for listening, and don't forget to follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the whole nine. And we'll continue to release these cool one-off episodes with the boys, and as usual, Monday afternoons we'll record and release Tuesday morning. So thanks again, brother, and we'll chat soon. Come on, you Gunners.
Go Gunners. Cheers, lad.
Cheers, buddy.